face our fear. Through highs and lows, our souls will learn. For truth is found where fires burn. We walk the road so long, so bright, to chase the truth, to find the light. In shadows deep we'll search, we'll soar, and know what's real forevermore. And when the road grows rough and steep, I'll be with you in all we keep. For truth is not a thing we find, but something shared, both heart and mind. And when the road grows rough and steep, I'll be with you in all we keep. For truth is not a thing we find, but something shared, both heart and mind. And when the road grows rough and steep, I'll be with you in all we keep. For truth is not a thing we find, but something shared, both heart and mind. We walk the road so long, so bright, to chase the truth, to find the light. In shadows deep we'll search, we'll search, and know what's real forevermore. We walk the road so long, so bright, to chase the truth, to find the light. In shadows deep we'll search, we'll soar, and know what's real forevermore.
Wow! Yes, if you can hit the right button, it even works better. Yes, and welcome this morning to the meeting pit. Today's guest, I realize probably a lot of people have not heard of him, but today's guest is Scott. Scott has a incredibly interesting journey. He's wow. I won't even try to step all over your story, Scott. I'll just let you go through it. Um, man, I just absolutely love the path that Scott is pursuing. And his research skills really have me jelly. I gotta say that. Yeah, I'll just I'll shut up now. Scott, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. It was a crazy weekend, but things are going good. How are you?
No, not bad, not bad. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Now we get into the silly season up until New Year's, and who knows what kind of normalcy life will return to after that. Who knows?
Yeah, right.
So Scott, uh, you started out. How do I'm trying to think. I keep trying to couch things in the most politest. Is that even a word? Screw it. It is now. In the most polite terms possible. But so you started out actually being addicted to substances. Am I right?
Yeah, I self-medicated for a really long time. That doesn't mean that, it's like pretty clear that I have like a genetic predisposition to
Mm,
substance misuse as well. I my mom and my brother passed away when I was 13, and my parents were divorced, and it was like a drawn out custody battle, and they really tried turning me against each other parent, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, and my mom was ill. She had asthma, diabetes,
Mm,
and she didn't take very good care of herself. She was codependent, in risky relationships, for herself and the family.
mm.
And her last boyfriend had isolated her out into the middle of the country away from her friends and family. Um, and
Mm,
so she would go to the hospital frequently, and one thing led to another, and she didn't want to go to the hospital because of custody issues, and it ended up costing her her life. Um, and then a month after that, my little brother was born from my dad and my stepmother,
mhm,
who died of kids 5 months after he was born.
mm,
And I was living with them, and so it really, not only is it just like a very important part of like a child development, right? You know, like the age of 12, 13.
mm,
But support through change is important as well. And, you know, when my dad and my stepmom at the time were experiencing such significant grief and loss, I can only
mm,
imagine it'd be incredibly hard to have the energy and, you know, the wherewithal to like be mindful of the support that like
mm,
everyone, like, you know, my step siblings needed, and I needed, also losing my mother. So
mm,
um so through that I was like on and off a lot of like very potent mental health medications, and that was kind
mm,
of their um route to normalcy for me.
mm.
And as far as family dynamics go, I was considered the scapegoat.
Oh, nice.
Um, so
Yeah.
my step siblings could do no wrong, and
Yeah.
if they did, somehow it was my fault, and that dynamic rang true up until
Mm,
probably like 10 years ago. Um, but due to that, I didn't know who I was, right?
mm,
My mom had like very low self-worth, and
mm,
I'll tie into the cultural piece later.
mm,
Um, but
mhm.
like in my household, it's like when my dad and my stepmom both work in like as nurses in psych units, they kind of have they had relationships with people, and their um education like really was an advocate for what they thought was best for me at the time. Um and so it really felt like at a point, even though I didn't feel like I had um some of the mental illnesses that they believed I did,
Mm,
that as a 13-year-old, 14, 15, that, oh, well, they're the medical professionals, so I must have it, right? And so it was like this like dichotomy of it doesn't feel like this is who I am, but also, these people that I should trust because they're
yeah.
my parents are like saying this.
Sure.
And that consisted of bipolar, oppositional defiant disorder, uh,
Mm,
severe depression, like anger management. I was in and out of support groups.
wow.
Like I did stints in like long-term mental health care, where it was like if I were to reflect on it, I would say that I probably incurred more trauma experiencing the environment and some of the things that were going on in it,
Mm,
than it
in-
helped.
interesting. Yeah, it that is one thing that surprises me is how often that very issue, the one that you just labeled, where you don't think you are and you're pretty sure you're not. But again, these are the medical professionals. Kind of we use the appeal to authority a logical fallacy on ourselves. And but yeah, that it's amazing how often that's come up that people were medicated. People I know were medicated for conditions they or medicated and given therapy for conditions they wound up not having. Um wow, yeah, and then that the ultimate gaslight, I guess.
Yeah.
To be told that you're something mentally that you're not. Wow. Um it's, it's not just you don't remember this, it's no, you are fill in the blank. Wow. Oh my gosh, and I never heard parts of what you, had just talked about. That is wow,
Mhm.
that is amazing.
Yeah, and there's, and then there's like other interesting components, right? It's like that. I have three older siblings that I share with my mother.
Mhm,
Um, and they're all like my oldest brother Brandon is 10 years older than me, Jamie's 8 years older than me, and then Tara is 7 years older than me. Um, and like I have a lot of love and appreciation for them, because they were
mhm,
18, 21, and 23 at the time when my mom passed away.
mhm,
And they were willing, like, while these things were going on, um, they they were like collecting and working, whatever jobs they could, and like
mhm,
had like a deep consideration if they can should continue the custody battle
mm,
for my mom. And um at the time, and it just shows like the codependent nature in which I was raised in, right?
mm,
Is that not only would there be times where it's like, my mom would keep me home because she was lonely and that she
mhm,
was ill and I was like really taking care of her. But like in
mhm,
that moment, when my siblings sat me down and talked to me about it, like I knew the best thing for me would have been to go live with my brother,
mm,
not my dad. Um, but I knew I could foresee the fight and like what it did to my mom, and maybe I had a little bit of PTSD of like having guilt about my mom dying, and that played such a huge role that I didn't want to burden them with the same
mm,
amount of stress that my mom had around a custody battle, even though it probably would have been best for me. So
mm,
I just, on a public forum, I think I'd be doing them a disservice if I didn't try to shine a light on how
mm,
appreciative I am of the selflessness that they had in that moment of grief.
mm,
So, and so moving on, I like around 16, they kept like prescribing me medication, but between the age of 15 and 16, I started like pretending to take them and throw them away. And
mm.
so they stopped adding medication, and my my dad's like, "Oh man, you're doing so good. These medications are really working." And eventually he caught me throwing them in the trash, and he was like, "How long you been doing that?" And I was like, "A year and a half." Uh, and he's like, "All right, so you don't want to take them anymore?" I'm like, "Yeah, right." And so then on, it stopped. But around that same time, I got my first minor consumption for
Mm,
alcohol. Um, and my dad came home from work. He worked nights, and he shined a flashlight in my face. And I remember these words, uh, deeply. Is he's like, the truth of it is, Scott, is that you just can't fucking drink
mm,
because your mom couldn't drink, her mom couldn't drink, and it killed your mom. And if you drink, it's gonna kill you too.
mm,
Um, and I think about that now specifically because I was reflecting with my brother Jamie, and when I was born, I almost died during childbirth, and also our mother and my dad sat them down when they were 9, 7, and 5 after I was born, and he said, "Your mom's not going to live long enough to see you guys graduate.
uh,
Um, your brother's okay, but your mom's not doing as well."
mm,
And when I was talking to my brother about doing this with you, and just like some of the dynamics that we had, he said that he carried that with him from 7 years old until today. And the
Wow.
reason he like disassociated with my mom's codependent and negative behaviors was solely because of that conversation he had with my dad. He's like, I don't think it was
Wow.
probably a positive thing that he
Mm.
said it to such young children, but he's like, it
Oh, yeah.
was stuck in my mind and made a difference.
Mm.
And so, I self-medicated from 15 up until uh, probably 24.
Wow.
Um,
Mm.
and it was a lot of like cannabis and alcohol.
Mm.
Um, that was the most frequent. I did have, you know, periods of time where like I would abuse ecstasy for benders and just like kind of whatever came across the table, really. Um, and and that's the interesting thing is that like I do have like a protective part of me where I can be like a little quicker to aggression, but like because of the dynamics in my household as a young child, like I've always had this like need to want to take care of people.
Mm.
And um my therapist calls it a what's it, the wounded healer.
Mm. Mhm.
um
Mm.
and and that was the nature of who I was even when I was using substances. It was it wasn't like a lot of like crimes or anything like that. Like it was
Okay.
mostly just like whatever I needed to do to like make sure that I wasn't going to um experience the grief and loss that I
Mm.
should be processing, you know.
Sure.
Um so I um I went to like a camp. It's like a lazy river on tubes, and you all camp and just like get hammered for days on end.
Sure.
Yeah, and probably like every venereal disease lives in the river. And so like someone like dumped their grill outside of my tent, and I like woke up to go to the bathroom, and I walked through the coals, burning hot, and I got third-degree burns on my foot.
Ooh.
Um,
Oh.
and instead of doing the responsible thing, which would be go to the hospital, I decided to stay another day and continue to drink and float down this disgusting river. And I'm like, lucky I still have my foot at this
Mm.
rate. But they had put me on some strong opiates after I'd burnt my foot. Um,
Oh.
and I was abusing other things as well at the time. So the thing is when they wanted to follow through with skin grafts, I bailed on
Ooh.
the treatment plan.
Mhm.
So my foot is still like pretty sensitive, but the issue really at hand is that like they never tapered me off opiates,
Mm.
because I bailed on the plan. So it's like my responsibility to have like followed through and just like
Mm.
advocate that like I didn't want skin grafts, but also that like I'm physically dependent on opiates, but the issue is that like I enjoyed it. So
Mm.
there's the other dynamic of it, and of course one thing led to another, and I ended up shooting heroin for 2.5 years.
Wow.
I went to treatment at Hazelden Betty Ford.
Mm. Big
Um,
name.
yeah, and the nice thing is because it's based in Minnesota, like if you
Mm.
have private, like decent private insurance, it's like considered in network. And so as long as you can like pay your deductible, um, you get to go.
Mm.
So the first time I went, um, my grandma and grandpa helped me pay for sober living and stuff like that. And because of that, I like didn't grasp the responsibility and the work it requires in order to maintain um, a lifestyle of recovery. and which is unfortunate because my nana and papa on my dad's side are like some of the most profound people in my life, and when they so selflessly offered to pay for things like that, um and I like squandered it away, like was like a real point of guilt for me, and it really may have been like a piece of the catalyst that like allowed me to be successful the next time I went to
Mm,
treatment.
mm,
And the thing I really appreciated about my relationship with them is like whenever I was self-destructive or had risky behaviors that affected me and not other people, they never scolded me for them. They always just like were compassionate
mm.
to me.
Interesting.
And because of that dynamic, um, like I didn't lie to them, even when I
Mm,
was using. And and if I'll be honest with you, I don't know without them that I um, would have gotten help at all.
mm,
So, um, so the first time I went to treatment, I went on Suboxone, which is a maintenance medication that like it curves cravings for opiates. It's considered a partial agonist, so it interacts with the receptor in a way that like
mm.
um, prevents you from going through withdrawal, but also stops other opiates from binding with it. And
Oh, okay.
so if you were to take some amount of opiates, like it would help kind of like an ibuprofen would, right? It's like it would help with the pain, but it like wouldn't give you any euphoria.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
and so that it's like a protective measure, and at the time it wasn't as widespread as it is now, and so there was a really interesting dynamic within AA groups with it because they didn't see it as like full abstinence.
Mm,
um
mm,
and so it's like treatment in these sober homes would require you to go to X amount of meetings and have a sponsor and do these things, and uh but you could tell when you're sitting in those rooms that they're like, he's not sober anyways. So like getting a quality sponsor when people are viewing you as using is like tough to do. And so I fell out the first time and I moved back home because I was like abusing my non-narcotic prescription medication a little bit, and I'm like, oh, I want to get off Suboxone because I don't want to be on it forever because I feel guilty about it. So let's take benzodiazepines so I can like not go through withdrawal of Suboxone because it interacts with the same receptor. And turns out I just like developed a benzodiazepine addiction. Um,
interesting.
yeah. Uh,
Wow.
so so when I come off the Suboxone, that also opened up the door for me to use IV opiates again and feel euphoria. And yeah, I overdosed in a Cub parking lot, and like 6 months after, um, I left the sober house, and I had a sticky horn in my Grand Dam, and I fell out on it, and I don't know, praise to the creator, uh, because for that sticky horn, because it stuck when I fell out on it, and because it did, someone called 911, and I got Narcan, and it saved my life, really.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I went back to treatment after that. Um, Ended up relapsing inside of inpatient, if you can believe it, you know. Um,
Mm,
and the next time I went to Hazel and Betty Ford outpatient, I gave up my will and I was just like, whatever you guys ask of me, I will do, and whatever you recommend, I will do. Um, and they're like, well, we'd like you to go to the halfway house that's attached to the outpatient treatment, and it's like, it's like 10 grand a month. um so I got a loan for the first month, and then I was able to squeak out a county bed for a month and a half, and then they just billed me for the last 2 weeks. And my commitment is like, while I was working there, is I like worked at a car wash in order to like save up money so I could pay for the deposit on a sober home.
Mm.
And so I worked at a car wash, and then in addition to that, I started working carpentry. And instead of like going to meetings, what I did is I just committed as hard as I could to medical providers, therapy, and programming at Hazel and Betty Ford.
Mm.
And I ended up staying in outpatient treatment for like a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Wow. Okay.
And because of, the overdosing, I was probably just considered like a high risk user, and so that's why my insurance would cover it.
Mm.
So I have this like very interesting relationship with AA and NA and stuff like that, because like the infrastructure of the steps are like, what I emulated in my life in order to like not allow risky behaviors to like interfere with like
Mm-hmm.
what I needed to do. Um, at my sober house, I had a couple of roommates overdose and die that we had to like I had to try and Narcan and resuscitate as well. And so this like experience, like first person experience the of death is like very prevalent in my life. And part of me thinks that maybe it's for a reason.
Mm.
So after the sober house and at Hazel and Betty Ford, my best friend from my childhood and I had started dating. Um, and she got pregnant, and we have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old together, and we're married. Um, and eventually Hazel's like, we need to make room for like more high demand patients, because it like was becoming more clear that I was like in sustained recovery. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I was very fearful of like leaving that, because it's like I don't connect with people at meetings, and like generally speaking, I have a hard time connecting with people based off like my humor, and it's like who I am sometimes, um and my personality traits. And so like even before I entered recovery, I really used like my vulnerability. I was like, I feel like this is the only thing that I have, and I just have to like lay it out there as much as possible in desperation to connect with people.
Wow.
And
Okay.
um because no one taught me how to interact, no one taught me how to be a responsible adult. And so I was always just, it's like, is this what people do? I was always in
Mm.
a constant state of you know low confidence, and like I'm behaving the right way, I'm
Mm.
interacting socially the right way.
Yeah.
But because of that, I did thrive in support groups. You know,
Mm. Mm.
um,
It's an interesting dichotomy there.
yeah, right. Especially when all the times like you know, um, I'll get into that later. But now, like upon reflection, when I think about um, who I am as a person, and just like some of my like social cues and the way I communicate and things like that. I've recently discovered like why that is. And I go to a tribal college. It's called Red
Mm.
Lake Nation College.
Mm.
Um, and my mom was half indigenous. Red Lake Ojibwe. Um, and so it just had been so long since she had passed away that like I kind of forgot who she was, and I forgot that like the way I communicate was like because of that. And after attending the college, it became clear to me that these people also have this like inner and intrapersonal like
Mhm.
communication style, and like
Sure.
the cadence and the way they talk, their like darker sense of humor, the you
Mm.
know physical cues they make when communicating.
Sure.
And so it like really helped me reflect on like why I like had this disconnect with people. But the way where that stems from is they put a lot of indigenous people into boarding schools um back in the day. And so my grandma was at the back end of that, but my great grandma was in the thick of it. And I can't find my great grandma's name she was given at birth. She was
Mhm.
renamed to Jane Smith when she was in the boarding schools. And so there was like this shame about
Mhm.
being indigenous.
Mm.
And um and so like when it was within the home, like we had things in the home that represented our heritage, but it wasn't talked about and it wasn't celebrated.
Mhm.
Um so I'm like really trying to, while I have this opportunity to be with people with a like heritage and have like ley lines to delve into who I am culturally and some of the spiritual aspects of it. It's like it's a way to like honor and remember my mother and my relatives um in a way with pride in which we should have been allowed to when those atrocities were being committed to the Native
Mm.
Americans, and to be able to like wear those and like teach them to my children with pride and not be able to have shame about it is going to be a really interesting part of my life, because it's like you know I'm going to carry the shame and guilt and um the low self-worth that my mom had, that like partially had to play with like um not having a sense of identity and a sense of self. um but they won't have to, you know and it like rings true for me, and I never understood why. But it's pretty clear to me that that's why. It's because the only people that could tell me were no longer here.
Mhm.
um and I think identity is just so important, you know like obviously I have other values and traits and things that I do that make up who I am that are outside of that, like
Mhm.
you know I always try to be of service, and I always try to do the right thing. I'm not perfect, I definitely make mistakes.
Mm.
And but like I anchored myself to that to like stay in recovery, but like
Mm.
I can tell there's a difference. It was like that was a lot of work, which it is supposed to be a lot of work. But when I'm with people at my tribal college and other indigenous people, I don't have to try.
Mm.
And
Mm.
um, that's not something I'm used to. And it's just been incredibly humbling to feel like you are where you're supposed to. So I feel out of place a lot.
Mm. Interesting, and that is one of the points you brought up. This is a side issue, but it comes
Yeah.
up with me often with body language. Um, that is one of the reasons why you put culture, when you're looking at somebody's body language, it's important to get their baseline, not quote the baseline. It's because and it's one of the things that Chase puts in order. The very last thing is actually your checklist. Do you touch your nose? Do you grab your throat? Do
Mm,
you put objects in your mouth? All that
right.
stuff. Actually, culture is much more important because one of the things that you pointed out is that you have this culture, this cultural mannerisms and behavior, even though you weren't really even brought up in it. It's like, why am I here? Not why am I here, but why am I here this way kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, that is fascinating to me that you exhibit those behaviors without being raised in it. That is fascinating.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is that, like, a lot of, they considered it to be a good thing, but there's it was called relocation. And so what they would do is they would relocate indigenous families to metropolitan areas where there's more employment opportunities and human service opportunities. Um, but as I get into this portion of it, this will really, shine a light on like the significance of this. Is that I am, yeah, I don't want to get political or anything, but I'll just say like the dichotomy of who I am as like I have my certification in peer recovery support, and so I am very mindful and aware of like trying to do my due diligence on cultural research and familiarity in order to like take care of any unconscious biases and to be committed to fairness no matter what your ethnicity, values, religion are, etc. But I also have this piece in me that is like fairly moderate and believe that like there is a threshold to where these things cause issues in your life, but then also you have the responsibility in order to rectify them, right? um and so like due to that, yeah, I like walk this line of like personal values and professional values that like waver a little bit in the professional way because like within that subset, like I am obligated to be this way. But like in my personal life, I assume personal accountability for things. But going back to what I was going to say is, I think that especially from like a um, social service and um, treatment of people of different cultures and like having the overall view of it being a melting pot is short-sighted a bit because there are demographics and groups of people that live in very tight-knit communities within metropolitan areas where
Mm, true.
they do get very good um, replication of their culture just based off of being with one another. And that obviously, when you go out into public places and do things like you're exposed to Eurocentric norms and stuff like that. But where you're most comfortable, you do get like-minded people with like-minded behaviors and traditions and values.
Mm,
Um, and so the relocation, although is like meant to be a positive, it's like peop indigenous people when they a lot of them stick together in reservations, most of them open reservations. But when you strip them away from their people,
mm,
um, I'm sure the lack of um, support from people from a like culture it makes it isolating and probably, and this is a vast generalization, and I'm sure there's unique situations for specific families, but I can imagine that it's difficult. And um and that's really where my interests lie professionally. I worked as a carpenter for over 10 years. Um, and after getting my certification, I tried to get a couple jobs. The place I was going to work got taken down by the feds for using the ambiguity of billable services of CPRSs to make an insane amount of profit
Mm.
and build state insurance. Um, and I'll just give an example to help people understand. Like, they would reach out to people that were in treatment and then bill them for reaching out. Like, so they weren't even calling the treatment center. They would call, not answer. Then their CPRSs would leave a message and then bill them for leaving them a voicemail.
Oh.
Um, and if anyone's interested, there's a news station in Minnesota called Care 11, and they do a Care 11 Investigates.
Mm.
And there's like a 6 or 7 piece news
Interesting.
collection of an investigation that you can watch.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Yeah,
I, wow, I've never been. The thing I find about so much of this, I've never even been exposed to a lot of that. But yeah, that's kind of. I mean, it's basically akin to getting a, getting billed for a phone call you don't want any part of,
right.
and now we're going to bill you for that. And I go, gee, thank you, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Uh,
and then they had like sober houses that they like paid for,
mm,
and so they would like sense. And this is like in the nature of CPRSs, right? Is like you go there, you work with a person one on one, and like see like what services you can provide within the scope of your professional responsibility. And but then what they would do is the CPRSs would drive these like big vans, and then they would load all the clients up, and then they would bill them individually as
oh,
CPRS services
oh my god.
um, to make the money. Yeah. So yeah, and the creator has life is funny because like I was waiting for an expungement to occur before I could start working there anyways. Um, and for no good reason, my expungement was taking a long time, and and they shut the treatment center down, and then my expungement went through.
Mm,
Um, and so it's like, if my expungement went through in an expeditious way, then, me as a human service professional would have been tied to that place for like
mm,
a
mm,
significant period of time. And
sure, okay.
um and during this time, I was having some, I have like a degenerative like back deal. That it's not crazy or anything like that, but it doesn't feel good. And so just like construction makes it worse. And so I was like pretty clear with my employer about what was going on. And and so they like hired my replacement. So things kind of got weird at my employer, my construction employer. And so like I valued them in such a way that I was like I know myself that if you change the conditions of like my position as a carpenter and like put me in the cabinet warehouse, that like I won't be my best self. And like I appreciate my time here so much that like I want to leave here in like good spirit and like appreciation of the time I spent here. And so I opted to like bow out instead of like go through this like messy transition until I became a CPRS somewhere else.
Mm,
But at this time, I had applied at the Indian Health Board as a CPRS, and um, they offered me an amount of money that they hoped they could do to like match what I made as a carpenter, because they said that like we need to hire someone who's indigenous. It's the only way we're going to connect with clients to support them in the best way. But they were union, and so they couldn't break the union rules to pay me more money for me to work there. And so this tribal college that was built down in Minneapolis a couple years ago, but it was at like a temporary location. And then they built a new campus. And so the main campus is up on the reservation in Red Lake. And then this is just an extension of it in the metro.
Okay.
And so when my expungement went through, it was like no, I have like a unique opportunity to like go back to school. And so I decided to do that. And upon entry into school, I started to find out that enrolled tribal members in the state of Minnesota get tuition waivers to U of M schools. And so that was like really appealing to me. And I always wanted to get my LADC, and so that was my intent when I settled in. But throughout my studies this last semester, I had written a couple of research papers and have been like learning more about our cultural background. And the cool thing about the tribal college is like when you're taking these courses, a part of they grade you on your grades, and then there's like this also an additional learning structure that they rate you on, like are you proficient in like these aspects of the course that we want you to build these skills upon. And a lot of them are adding the indigenous perspective in how to use these types of skills practically in Indian country. And through this, things became very clear to me, that when I was in treatment and stuff like that, that my communication style and things about me didn't connect with other people. But it's like profound that like these things connect with most people when I'm at this tribal college. And so as I'm having this like profound experience of feeling a part of the tribe and being accepted, and finding my identity, it also makes me reflect on my journey. And I'm like, well, what if these components were there when I was getting help? And also the context of what the Indian Health Board had told me about what it means and what the responsibility and what the requirements are of somebody who is going to help, our people with substance misuse and mental health issues and stuff like that. And so I was asked to do read research on IQ testing in indigenous people. And it was, man, it might be some of the most profound research that I've read in my life up to this point. But they would test indigenous children for their IQ in the same way they tested Eurocentric people. And so not only would you be bringing them into a foreign environment with a other cultured person with a disconnect to administer the IQ testing, but additionally, the English language wasn't used in tribal communities until much later in their cultural lifespan, right? And so because of that, it's it's like less established, let's
Yeah.
say, and it's like takes more work to understand and use it, practically every day, because it's like you're communicating with like people, and so and you're really around all these other people of your tribe, and so there's not a real need to like match Eurocentric people's expectation of like the language rules.
Sure.
And so because of that, these indigenous children tested right on level with the rest of the data set, and even excelled. There's a big portion that excelled in other things, but the literature was way lower. And whoever administered these IQ tests and whoever they gave them to used it to consider them learning disabled. And if you can, if people, if you think about it, right, and so if like you consider them learning disabled, and then you put them in separate types of classes, and then it doesn't look as good on a college transcript, and then you don't get to as good at colleges, and they don't get as good at jobs, and then it like perpetuates, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Um, and so what that really made me think about is like, how widespread is this? Like, I doubt it's just like relegated to IQ testing. Um, and so I'm doing research now and digging into it, but I have this interest in what grant writing looks at um, on a large scale. Is like, I know that in the state of Minnesota, they're like really mindful and like really moving forward to try and provide equal and even greater opportunities to make up for shortcomings to the indigenous community through like funding and grants and stuff like that. But wholesale, I'm just wondering, like grants usually come with like benchmarkers, right, that like you need to hit in order to maintain or to get more funding,
Yeah.
or even to qualify for them. And I wonder if they're tilted in such a Eurocentric way that like getting access or maintaining grants for mental health, for substance misuse, is unfair to cultures that are more tight knit,
Sure.
because like indigenous peoples, communication styles, what they believe in, connections are different, and same goes for Somali and things like that. And so if you're treating everyone the same and the success rates waver, then it's like, why is that the patient's fault?
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
and my goal is to dig into that professionally, and it became pretty clear to me that if anyone's going to respect or care about what I have to say, that in LA, that like a certification for to be a drug counselor is probably not going to do it. Like I'll probably need a master's or a doctorate in psychology in order to accomplish what I want to accomplish and to be taken seriously.
Sure.
And this, but full disclosure to everyone is that like I'm a nerd. Um, I enjoy reading research, um, and so I'm just like I'm really like, yes, like the journey to this point is sad, and it's been like littered with loss. Um, but because I was isolated, and this will seem grandiose a little bit, but I think it like gives me this like unique perspective to like feel these things in a different way, to like motivate me to want to do something that's like impactful. Um, and that almost being alone like feeling alone throughout this journey, made me feel both sides of the coin. And so I'm hoping I can bridge that through psychology and just trying to get a fair shake for Indigenous people. And then I think the benefit, which is also, I'll also say that like it's incredibly sad and messed up that like the numbers are so small for like my tribe and other tribes, but that it creates a unique opportunity to show effectiveness when you do make changes and do things like that. It
Sure.
makes the numbers more profound, and if that's something that I can collectively do with collaboration with tribal council and tribal services and metropolitan services, that like hopefully we can make a real difference,
Mm.
and the data would be, a little more profound, because people wouldn't be able to shoot it down because of lack of significance due to sheer numbers of people.
Got some starred comments here. Indigo, Indigo Twin, Indigo's insights. Finding belonging stuck a deep chord with me when you said, I like being at the tribal college because I don't have to try to fit in. That hit hard for some reason. And I think that that's probably going to be the case with a lot of people, regardless of their upbringing, that we find subsets of people we just flow naturally with. Talking about the billing issue with the van sounds almost as bad as the early 2000s paying for bodies in rehab in Florida. Um, I wonder if my cousin felt that lack of connection. He had struggled with his whole life with addiction. I wonder if that's from having a lack of connection to his indigenous roots. Yeah,
Mm,
that is kind of deep. That thing that you hit on there. Um, the opposite addiction is not abstinence, as it is connection. Let's see here. Yeah, this sharing with Shannon. My understanding is that Native Americans have a genetic predisposition to alcoholism. That's pretty much what you found, I take it, judging from your
yeah, my experience and just like my lineage, right? Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest here. It's like I'm Native American, Irish, and German. So,
Mm.
um,
Woo.
I was born to, I don't know, have whiskey in my hand, and that's rough too. I mean, I think that even if you like look at it at a biological and genetic level, right? You know how I was like talking about
Mm.
um adapting to the English language
Mm.
being so late in the lifespan creates um like an issue, just as alcohol does, right? It's like a lot
Mm.
of Eurocentric people have been exposed to alcohol forever. And
Mm.
so for a lot of people it's like not a problem, right? But like for indigenous people in our culture, like being grounded to nature and
Mm.
respecting every living being, because like if we take care of it, it'll take care of us. And so the alteration of those things is like not as prevalent. And also other herbs and things and foods that weren't found in our area. Like that's why a lot of Native Americans are diabetic. We weren't exposed to sugar
Yeah.
up until colonization, and same with lactose intolerance. You
Mm.
know, um, and and it's all tied into that. And so you know it's just interesting to me the amount of success that is found in collaboration when you meet people where they're at on a psychological or social level, but we don't do that on a genetic or a biological level.
Mm.
Which is also something else I would really like to
Oh yeah,
delve into.
yeah. That is a fascinating area, which we see starting. We're just on the cusp and starting to open up is genetics and the role they play and why we are the way we are. And not that it's not necessarily we are born the way we are. That's it's not a choice or anything like that. We inherit this, so it's like, okay, how do I navigate this avatar I'm stuck in? How do I deal with this? Indigo listening in on a private conversation apparently, but I can agree with that. I've healed leaps and bounds since finding connection with other people who went through similar situations as me, and that is something that's true beyond culture and everything else. Finding commonality with other
Mm.
people can really, really help. NA states one addict helping another's without parallel, kind of a fancy way of saying the same thing. Yeah, yes, this is the one I feel like I'm learning so much from you, Scott. Thank you for doing this with Ben. I am starting to realize the impact of cultural traumas on my family and matri I watch AA Ron say this name several times. I cannot do it. Mock. We have this phenomena with Low German here because Low German has a completely different grammar and everything from High German. And that was one of the things that you had talked about that I just found interesting that it never occurred to me that that would flow into the IQ
Mm.
as we rate it. But yeah, people who live on the border, they have their own. They take some English, they take some Spanish, they jam them together, and they invent a few new words. It's their own communication subset. That doesn't make them to rate them by another culture's standard. That's really kind of like, wow. Oh my gosh. But I mean, it's the same thing with Native Americans since they have their own communication style and they can use they use English words and things like that, but they just have a different culture, a different way at which they look at them, a different communication style. Doesn't man, that is so interesting. Now, when you brought that up, it's like I can't believe that never occurred to me. Now that you're sober, how do you deal with the loss that you've had in your life? I'm having trouble with this right now.
Um, I mean, full disclosure, if I'm being like completely vulnerable, is that like there are times that like I struggle with it, especially with this cultural component as well. Um,
You know,
if my because my mom had low self-worth and like uh I feel like one of the first pieces into like gaining self-worth for me is to like have my identity. So it's like to know who I am. And when I know who I am, it's easier for me to find gratitude. And when I can
mm,
find gratitude, it's easier for me to like
mm,
feel self-worth. And so when it comes to, my mom, I how do I honor her? Um and unfortunately, it's gonna hurt for me to find out the best way to do that is. And
mm.
I've done a plethora of therapy and EMDR and all kinds of things that at different points in my life allow me to not have such a visceral reaction to the loss of my mom and my brother. But the interesting thing, Brianna, is that the older I get and the more I develop and change, and sometimes I develop poor behaviors too, right? But
Yeah.
it's like my perspective changes. And it's almost like like there's a saying that's like, you replace your skin every so often because like you shed and regrow, you know. Um, is I feel like when I grow new skin and perspective, um, my new skin crawls with the grief and loss of the people that I lost because I feel it different.
Mm.
Um, and I see it, and I didn't realize this till recent, and I've talked to Ben about it recently as well. Is that like it just turns out like as I change, I'm always going to feel differently about it, and sometimes it's more comfortable, and sometimes it's more uncomfortable.
Mm.
And at this part in my life, my my children never got to meet my mom, and I'm trying to figure out how to carry on traditions and pieces of her that were positive so they don't have to struggle between I'm honoring her, but there's also like these things that hurt. And the best thing that I can do is go through the hurt in order to honor her the best way I can
Mm.
that makes sense with my current perspective and who I
Sure.
am right now.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, like I always try to do it on my own, and a lot of times it just like doesn't work. I
Mm.
I have groups that I go to where um man, I made deep connections and they support me unconditionally, and also I find ways to um, understand who those people were on a deeper level so I can represent them in a better way.
Mm. Mm. Matter mock. Two boys in my mom's hunting course had to have the questions translated and absolutely aced the test afterwards. They never spoke High German in their environment, so they just didn't understand it. Yeah,
Mm,
and that goes back. Yeah, that is a core failure or weakness of the trying to rate somebody's intelligence quotient with their communication skills using somebody else's standard from which is separate from the person who you're grading. Yeah, that is so odd that I've never even given that any thought before, but until you brought it up. Um,
mm.
and then
Well,
that, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say something else that's interesting, right? Is like even though like I talk about that, so like I'm Anishinaabe. Is
Mm,
like that's what like the greater set of um tribe that I am, right? But it's like, but it consists of Cree, which is Canadian,
mm,
um, Ojibwe, which is like most like northern Midwest in the
mm,
United States, and then Algonquin, which is like more eastern, um, northern United States of America and Canada. And there's actually um, subsets of Anishinaabe people that have had French because of French Canadian. That's what like French Canadian Indian,
mm, mm,
where French and
mm.
Ojibwe is like kind of combined in their language subset, and they call it
Interesting.
like Métis, and
Mm,
um, and so there's even like like differential in like
mm.
languages when it comes to like our
Wow.
tribal aspect. So, um, and even when you go from like even like our reservation to like some reservations, like you know, like we say an N before words when we're speaking about ourselves, where like other people don't. And
Mm,
there's even like little things like that, and it's just like incredibly interesting, especially when you get to, and that's something that like I really appreciate about being indigenous is that um the information that I get is passed down from
mm.
family to family. You know where it came from.
Yeah.
and I have a lot of pride in that.
Mm. It, one of the things that came out of all this, and this is one of the things that we talked about earlier. Excuse me. Um, I wonder a lot of it isn't the age set or the generation of the people, which you're talking about your mother feeling, shame to even admit, her or feeling pressured to divorce herself from her Native American heritage. I found it so fascinating. Uh, my mother had mentioned, that oh, you're Native American, but it's only a percentage or two. Don't even worry about don't even worry about it. And I kept asking her, not that it's going to change anything in my life. I mean, I know it's a minor percentage, but still, it's just trying to get the information out of her. It even just meeting with her that last weekend, it was or this weekend rather, it was watching her body language is fascinating because she is admitting to it, but you could see she was exhibiting signs of disgust of even talking about it. You kind of get the
Mm,
Billy Idol sneer on one side. That you could tell it was something at which she was told, and there's no way I'm going to at this point in her life. I mean, she's so old. There's no way I'm going to have a chance of reprogramming that. Um, but it was interesting to see her. I'm just trying to find this out. There's no chance of me probably at this rate being able to find my great grandmother's name, who was Seminole, and it turns out there was somebody else close to the same line who was a quarter. My grandfather on the other side was a quarter Seminole. But I mean, what does that mean for me? It's not as deep a connection as with you
mm,
having a direct parental relationship there or lineage, but still, it just amazes me that um, maybe it's a generational thing where we don't talk about this, we don't admit to this, we don't. No, we
yep.
just hush up and be quiet about it. Maybe it'll go away like some uncle that gets drunk at parties or something. Maybe it's a social faux pas we learn or something.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
it's
that's interesting.
It's actually a biological genetic disposition or cultural learned disposition. They tend to talk about
I see.
yeah. Let's see here. IQ is a standard of showing intelligence has been very well shown to be a bad form of metrics. Yes. I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, and if I can give you some affirmation, I just want to say that like my experience in my community is that like if you have the blood running in your veins, that you are one of the people.
Mm,
And so if I could, you know, show you know, just just show some affirmation to you that it's
mm,
important, and the Seminoles played a real significant role. I mean, we've talked about this, but they helped like slaves
mm,
escape and kept them safe, and to do that is something to have pride in. You know.
mm. And Jimena also talks about not only measuring the level of communication, but education. Yes, because education and intelligence really I mean, maybe you're talking the difference between wisdom and intelligence at that point, but your capacity for intelligence shouldn't. I mean, it should be your capacity for intelligence. How quickly do you pick things up? What's your thought process like? Are you analytical? Are you naturally, these things?
Mm,
Um, happens here in Mexico with a lot of Oh, yeah, I guess it would with because down in Mexico, I guess you're going to have different Native American tribes down there as well. Some going back like the Inca and whew, yeah. especially indigenous ones. Thank you, Scott, because this helps with new perspectives, understanding for me. Thank you for sharing with us. Wow. Um, let's see here. Uh, my maternal grandmother was made an American, and she refused to. Another one. I refused to talk about it. I don't know the percentage. It's not high, but noticeable. She would talk, so I don't have a lot of info. I would love to have. Yeah, yeah, and that's. I'm in the same boat. It turns out my grandmother was doing a lot of research. I don't know why into um one of my ancestors who fought in the American Civil War, and I might be able to find something there, but I imagine she probably glossed over that completely. But so you're oh, I'll let you finish. But yeah, this is just this is amazing subject to get into, and of course you're finding uh, one of the papers or one of your your composition paper, which reads more like a dissertation,
Yeah.
was fascinating to me. The amount of research you did into, of all things, dye and its effect on ADHD, which is then going to have the effect of earning
Mm,
capacity, which is then going to have the effect of what foods you can buy, because of course, it used to be poor people would live, or they would eat more organically, but now it's
right.
completely flipped, where people on lower socioeconomic scales tend to eat more processed food, therefore exasperating the problem. It's just, oh my gosh, that stuff is. And I guess you have I guess you have a genetic aspect there with the Native Americans on top of it.
Yeah, and that's something else I want to dig into. And I love this fact. I mean, Ben's heard it, but there's a creation story, and it's like the base of spirituality for Native Americans. Before I jump to the genetic predispositions, I just really wanted to like
Mm,
share this story. Is that from like familial storytelling, um, there speaks of the Great Flood and the drainage of Lake Agassiz,
mm,
which was a glacial lake that went from like I think it was like Canada, like maybe down into like Illinois or something like that. Like it's like huge. Um, and and that flood is like the first one was almost 13,000 years ago, and then the drainage of it was like 8,000 years ago. And this it speaks about like Winnebuju, who is like the first man that like goes on this journey, um, and like it predates Abrahamic religion
mm,
by 5 to 7 thousand years, and so the the fact that like a lot of our a lot of the wars are rooted in like religious context is crazy to me, and I think just like just like having faith in something higher yourself, because like we believe in a creator, right?
mhm,
And I think if you just stay grounded and just respect that about everyone, that they have like some form of creator and some sort of like religious norms outside of that, is just like really important. But I just always love telling that story because it's not widely known,
mm,
and to have that within like storytelling context and not in textbook that's altered by someone
mm,
who has some intent or some obligation. It is shared because of wanting to lift up and share tradition with families. And so the fact that it comes from that is like very heartwarming to me.
mm.
And also honestly, like gives it more weight to
Yeah.
me personally. But moving on to what we were talking about. Yeah, and I'm very interested in this. I have been my wife and I have been interested in the MFR gene for quite some time, but I became much more interested in it when I was talking to a different group of people. And and this is going to be kind of controversial, right? But there is an administration of a medical product that will potentially help you stave off some commonly passed on diseases and illnesses like polio and stuff like that. And they use heavy metals as adjuvants to make them more effective.
Mm.
And and that's why we got into it. I have some of the losses in my life like may or may not have been tied to the administration of some of these like products, and it like sent off a alert to me that if it's happened more than once, then potentially more than once, and I don't know for sure, but that it's a genetic issue. And so that's why I'm really interested in the MFR gene, because it is genetic, and it has to do with heavy metals. And I don't have the research in front of me right now, but the thought to me is that people with MFR genes, because of um, the methylfolate issue, they have a harder time excreting heavy metals. And so when you accumulate heavy metals and can't get rid of them, and then you add a minimal amount, like which they do in adjuvants in these medical products, that it can compound and create a
Mm.
reaction.
Mm-hmm.
But also, the MFR gene ties into the synthetic food coloring, because the paper on the synthetic food coloring, and the research that I've done, and I can cite it if anyone's ever interested in it. But there are studies that have been done where they administer yellow food dyes called tartrazine on its own in varying dosages, increasing across a number of people.
Mm-hmm.
And this created sleep disturbances, anxiety, hyperactivity, um, and the testing markers showed that it creates a zinc deficiency, and zinc is like one of the vehicles for excreting mercury and heavy metals. And when you accumulate heavy metals, it reduces the neuroplasticity and neuron creation, and which also creates a state of hyperactivity and like lack of focus. Um, and due to this, I'm wondering if like Native Americans have a higher predisposition
Mm.
to having an MF or gene mutation. Um, and my daughter's hypermobile as well, and there are also MF or gene mutation symptoms. Um, through the methylfolate issue that can create hypermobility. And probably because of the two aspects of the heavy metals, there's less research on it. So it like gives me a go ahead maybe to try and like do some, and maybe um, figure out some more information that MF or gene mutations and ADHD are more common within each other,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's something that I'm looking at. But if we're looking at just ADHD on its own, and just hyperactive tendencies due to synthetic food coloring, is that like on its own it creates hyperactivity because of the zinc deficiencies. Um, and additionally, there is a genetic and environmental component to it as well. And so due to that, um, it's going to be perpetual, right?
Mm.
And like you were saying, like the workforce numbers was like, I think it was like 16 to like 100 and something $billion across all the people tested, but it was an average between a lesser salary of $8,000 to $16,000 to a person who has ADHD or hyperactive tendencies versus those who don't, which restricts the availability of more whole foods without synthetic food coloring, because you
Mm.
reach for more nutrient dense options.
Sure.
And so it's like a socioeconomic um, poverty, quote unquote, issue in perpetuity, which
Mm.
is like extremely fascinating to me, especially for like how it seems ADHD is becoming more widespread and maybe have been misdiagnosed as other things
Yeah.
previously.
Yeah, not and that was one thing I found, at least even in my personal life, at a much more micro level, when I was dealing with the iron in my liver. I
Mm-hmm.
noticed I don't have ADHD, but I have ADD. I noticed my symptoms were much worse when my body was trying to deal with that extra iron. That my ADD was just, it was getting really hard to control, and it's like, holy crap! I have a newfound respect for people that have that level and are dealing with that neurological noise throughout their life. It's like, wow, how do they do it? But Indigo Insights asks, do you think colonization has had more harmful impact on other immigrant cultures as well? My grandparents didn't teach my mother finish her cultural touchstones because they wanted her to fit in.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm gonna sound a little conspiratorial here. Um, like when you look at the thing as a whole,
Mhm.
is like I don't think it stopped when colonization like started to occur. Um, and I don't think it was like some grand plan. But I do think, you know, once you iron out people's cultural norms and like in favor of one that people see as normal, um, then like I find a ton of pride,
Mhm.
especially now in being indigenous and
Mhm.
being a Red Laker, right? And so because of that, I have this sense of pride that it's like I owe this to my ancestors and myself and my children to like maintain these like cultural traditions. But when you beat and wring cultural norms and cultural traditions out of people, it is my belief that there's like not as much to have pride in, and so that like that you may become more malleable,
Mhm.
and with malleability becomes a greater affinity to be manipulated into
Mhm.
into being a part of being an American that is optimal for whomever runs it.
Mhm.
um and so I think, and like I said, I don't think it was a grand plan, but I think it was something that has been noticed over time. It's like if you break down the things that people have pride in, um, then they're more susceptible to, you know, being convinced of other things.
Sure. No, they were very much taught it was not accepted, and it was published for talking about. Unfortunately, wish I had more information. I feel very deep connection. Oh, okay. Yeah, she was talking earlier
Mm,
about the earlier what do you want to call it, generation
yeah.
keeping it hush hush. Let's see here. There was one down here. I think it was Indigo Insights asked. Yes, here we go. Do you think DNA websites could help descendants of indigenous tribes reconnect with their roots?
Yeah, so if you can't tell, I'm a little conspiratorial. Um, um, but so it's like I won't send mine in. But I think so, and I think so. For
Mm,
sure, because if you can find, I think the less important part is about them like telling you what you are, because I'm not sure of the validity of like what they do and how deep they go, but
mm,
connecting you to other people that have like submitted their family tree that you share blood connections with
mm, mhm,
might be a way to figure out where they were located, what tribe they are from, in which you can call the tribal archives and trace your lineage. So,
mm.
from that aspect, I believe so.
Kind of like Wikipedia, where the article may not be accurate, but you might be able to find some sources within it that may give you, which may lead you down different path. I know that due to my medications, I can't have anything with blue 1 and red 40. Red 40 is a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, using so many U.S. colonials. Also interacts with my medication, but I never knew there was a genetic component.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's like it's funny, that my joke is that like if someone like is against food dyes or don't want their kids to have food dyes or you homeschool, that like we will tell you, you know. Um and so like at the school they people would be like want to give my kids treats and stuff like that. And that's the other super cool thing about the tribal college I go to is like they treat my kids like it's just so beautiful, like they're willing to like help with them while I'm in class. They're helping with them so I can like hopefully do a facilitator role, and they're just very kind to them. But like people would want to give them treats, which is like totally understandable, right? And they'd be like, oh no, there's food dye in it, right? um and then Halloween they got into some food dye candy, and like my life vision counselor, she was like, I didn't believe you, but like the difference between your children when they had red food dye and when they didn't was insane. Insane.
Mm,
So especially, because like my kids are mostly detoxed from food dye, and so the reaction that they have
mm,
when they consume it is like more significant because of like a tolerance thing. But
yeah,
like it's just like a very good contrast of like what it's like at normal state versus
sure.
with food dye. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If you're still getting it trickled to you, the spike in it after receiving a major dose isn't going to be as great as if you start out with none. And then, of course, they were definitely. Oh, Chris, conversation with Christy. They are definitely very oppressive to indigenous people. No one would take away someone's culture. It is very devastating. Taking away ceremony and dance is awful. Yes, and that is one thing that is, I think, more and more people are, and I think there's been kind of an awakening to, for a while, for dance and the rituals that they would do. But I think I could be wrong. I could be washed up. But at least from my limited perspective, I think people are starting to realize the value of culture and how rich the Native American rituals and dances and styles of dress.
Mm.
Above all things, back when I went to a particular church, the pastor there was talking about going to the Tohono O'odham. Can pronounce it correctly. Um, what do you call it? Reservation, and he was there watching a dance. And at one point, he went to take a picture of this Native American grandmother, kind of a matriarch of the tribe, and he went to bring up his camera, and all these guys rushed in between them. Said, "No, no, no, no! Don't you do that!" And he said that was a very interesting reaction. That maybe we should have that reaction more often with certain things that we've been a little more you know giving away and things, but he was always struck by the young men of the tribe getting between him and this matriarch when he was starting to take a picture. And I don't know why the picture taking was a big thing. I won't pretend to know. I would like to project what I think it is, but I'd be speaking out of ignorance. But it was interesting how the difference of the culture there was, no, you don't get to take a picture. No, you don't. And that was,
Yeah, no, that's yes, yeah, it's super interesting, and I agree with like the dancing and like I don't know, we've been to a powwow. Like my mom took me to one when I was like way younger,
Mhm.
and then outside of that, I haven't been back to the Red Lake Nation in like 20 years, and I'm gonna go
Mm.
this year. Um, but there's like Indian centers down in the metro area where they do things, and then there's also other tribes and like closer to me, and they hold powwows other places. But like this is called a ribbon shirt, and
Oh.
they're handmade, and you wear them to, like, festive things, and you wear them as tradition. I don't have any what you consider formal regalia
Mm,
for males, but this is for my 3-year-old for Christmas. This is a jingle dress,
mm.
and they wear it when they dance, and
Oh,
so
sure.
there's been it's like a real cool piece to it, and also I think it's brought us closer as a family, and I've been
Mm,
putting out tobacco, and
mm,
collecting medicines,
mm.
and smudging, and burning sage, and things like that, and it does really help me find peace. It's always been interesting to me. It's like I've always been at peace when I'm like fishing
Mm.
by myself out on a lake in the woods. Like I don't even it's interesting. Like my addiction to nicotine seems to like disappear.
Mm.
Like when I'm doing that, and I feel solitude,
Mm.
and like spiritual, and
Yeah.
now that makes sense to me when
Yeah.
it never had previously.
And I find that interesting because one of the people in this chat conversations with Christy, she's into um, all sorts of things, astrology, tarot, all sorts of things like that. Energy, I guess I'll put it. But she talks about the practice of leaving out tobacco and things like that. When you started talking about that in Tara's group a while back, that was the first thing I thought of was Tara talking about it. Mock writes, "My biological grandfather referred to my grandmother's culture and Low German language in derogatory terms, and he lost it when she spoke of the farmer language with the grandchildren that grew up with it." Yeah, that
Mm,
talking about we're going back to talking about how um, our I guess our generation seems to be so anti divergent cultures. I won't call them divergent. I
yeah.
don't know what the term would be to use there, but
Yeah, I started using this term, and someone asked me at a speaking engagement if we could collaborate on it further, but and a lot of this comes from like the vein of like my peer support hat being on, and is that like you generally want to be like support and
mm,
unconditional regard is the best way to motivate and support change in people. And
mm,
so by calling things a minority culture,
yeah,
just like doesn't
yeah, that's a
that
bad.
yeah, it's not great. And so I'm trying to coin the phrase specialized, or
That's right.
specialty
Yeah,
cultures, and so if
yeah,
I'm sure it's much easier to say it, which is just like kind of speaks to the state of like the sociological piece when it looks at upon cultures, is that
mm,
like maybe when we're speaking about ourselves, it's like I'm indigenous, i am I am Anishinaabe, right? But this is a minority culture. It's like when I speak of my own culture, it's like it's less common, I feel like, to speak about it as a minority culture unless you're making a point about it. And when you
mm,
speak about others, they'll but I think that creates like a false power dynamic, whereas if
mm,
like we treat it as like specialized, it means that like a perfect example is like elders in Native American tribes and indigenous tribes, like
mm,
they're considered experts, and so if you have dialogue with them and use them in some sort of writing, they are citable and they're deemed an expert and educated in their culture. And I think that should be celebrated across
mm,
all cultures, and
mm,
by looking at it from that perspective could really change how we treat each other, and
mm,
it would really take the combativeness out of um, you know, the context of how volatile racial equality is in this day
mm,
and age.
yeah, yeah. It's the other. Just saying that one's not better. Yeah, that makes sense. Your research is so interesting. And this is Indigo Twin or Indigo Insights. Your research is so interesting. How hard is it to work food dye out of your diet. Ooh, I wonder if that also impacts pain and or other chronic illnesses.
Yeah, well, that's incredibly interesting, right? Is that like the argument, especially in the research that I did, is that like energy dense foods have more of, more GMOs, more food dye, right? But when you look at Europe, food dyes, synthetic food dyes are illegal in like some of those areas. And the food is actually cheaper than it is here.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
um I shop at Aldi. Um it's a German based store, and you like put a quarter in for the cart and you buy your bags, and so you should bring like reusable bags for your sake or whatever, but like because of that they're able to like have their prices be way lower.
Mm,
um and because they're a German company that also is affiliated with Trader Joe's, that their products that are manufactured by them don't have synthetic food dye in them,
mm.
and it's
Okay.
more affordable than any grocery store you're going to go to. And so, although I make this argument that energy dense foods with these things are more affordable, I feel like Aldi specifically has a model that is conducive to that, that is also affordable. So, to me, there's really no excuse why America can't operate that way.
Mm.
So, but it is, like it was hard at first. Like I would cheat, like I would keep my kids to it, and then I would like crush a bag of Sour Patch Kids or something like in the middle of the night.
Mhm.
But now, as I'm like, the further along I get in my
Yeah.
journey, the less work it is to be mindful of it. And so it's like if I go to Trader Joe's and they have like some good candy, or even Aldi or fruit snacks or whatever, where it's like you have this like, this way you treat yourself with like a treat or something like that. There's alternative ways to find like very efficient replacements to your satisfaction that
Mm.
are pretty easily accessible. But it is hard because it's like, I am a creature of habit. So it's like, I did like these cereals, I did like these foods, I did like these, but then it's just a self-awareness over
Mm.
conditioning throughout time,
Sure.
and I would say it did exacerbate like my hyperactive tendencies
Yeah.
and my uncomfortability and things like that as well.
Sure.
And I will say that like I have low testosterone, and I've been supplementing for probably close to 3 years now. And
Mm.
so I've been getting consistent blood work. And right around that time is when I committed myself to no longer trying to consume these things.
Mm.
And through that, like outside of, I as well have high iron saturation. Um, and full disclosure, I like contracted hepatitis C when I was using for 7 years. And I'm like healing from it. So I've been like trying to look very specifically and closely at my liver function.
Mm.
But over the last 3 years, my doctor, quote, said, your body is working at a superhuman level and that your markers are phenomenal. So,
Mm.
and I would attribute that to
Sure.
um, my diet
Mm.
and probably fasting as well. So,
Sure. Yeah, now that was one of the things that hit me. I when I was dealing with hemochromatosis, it just saps the energy out of you. You don't. I mean, when once you get symptomatic, um, at least in my case now, I shouldn't say you. I'll say
yeah,
me. But I found that I lacked energy to do anything. I mean, it just at the core level, it's like you have zero motivation to move, and it's hard to fight that consciously. It won out, and my body atrophied like crazy, and as a result, started cheating, going back on. Although I did do sourdough, which at least not getting that gluten component. Um, but I did find it fascinating that as part of that, I was also intermittent fasting. And my doctor noticed that, I expected my liver values just to be in the toilet. And she said, you know what? They actually improved. over the last test,
Mm,
and it's just because, I mean, there's I guess what I'm saying is you don't necessarily have to go from 0 to whole hog, no, none of this, that there's intermediate steps that can show benefit, and one of the things that I was doing, when I was in the middle of that, is I was still doing, high protein fasts occasionally,
mhm.
skipping breakfast, eating a high or, drinking a high protein, energy drink and things like that, that even that was, it helped out quite a bit. So, you don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to go like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna quit immediately," because a lot of this stuff, some of this stuff is pretty high, it's fairly addictive, and it's
Oh, yeah.
very hard. Like carbs with me, oh my god, it was, sugar, pff, no problem, but carbs, oh,
Oh, yeah.
that would kick my ass.
Yeah, I love pasta. Yeah, yeah, and that's a and I still struggle with carbs and sugar. It's like definitely my biggest shortcoming of someone in recovery.
Mhm.
But but yeah, I'll also say that like because of like the um cirrhosis in my liver, that like I've done like a lot of research on like liver regeneration, and also my stepmother has like bile duct issues.
Mhm, mhm.
And so I've done like pretty extensive research on like pre and probiotics and liver function, liver regeneration, and in mice, specific probiotic administration actually opened up collapsed liver bile ducts. And um and so additionally, like I'm a very regular pre and probiotic consumer, and I would also attribute like my current markers to that as well.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, there were some practices which I won't go into here, but, they're fairly embarrassing, but my gosh, they do help,
Oh
that
yeah.
I've done to, increase that as well. Conversation with Christy, that's the reason why we always went to powwows. I learned to beat and to dance for those who couldn't dance. That is
Mm,
that would because she was the one who was talking about setting out tobacco and things like
that's
that.
amazing. It sounds like you're, even though you're having a tough time trying to like reverse engineer to like find the answers you want, that you're honoring your lineage,
Mhm.
and I want to commend you for that.
It's insane to see the different. Yes, we were talking about this earlier about American and EU products with dyes. As a matter of fact, one of the easy fixes for a butter, you can just buy. Dang it, wish I could remember the name. Um, Butter from Ireland, I think it is, or
Oh,
Scotland.
Kerrygold.
Yeah, that even that, just because it's still mass produced. It's still, whatever. But because they don't allow certain practices over in Europe, it's a much better butter, and that's an easy cheat to kinda knock some of that stuff out. Um, yeah, try and take advantage. Oh, yes, going back to that skirt, that's beautiful. I always loved the way hoop dancers dance. I use tobacco as a sacred herb.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, going back, I'll touch one more thing on the food dye thing. Is that I was having a discussion with someone, like you know, like full disclosure, it's like it's like I like when elections come up, like I don't vote because I don't want to be. I'm not comfortable putting myself behind anyone, just because it's like I'm fairly uncomfortable with like moral and political practices. But like wholesale, a lot of things that occur in like psychology when it comes to like research and conducting studies, and a lot of like the ethics and things we have now, and the regulatory bodies that like look at these things usually come from like bad practices. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Mm,
if you ever look at the syphilis study that was conducted a long time ago, they like didn't tell them that they were like what they were doing. They didn't tell them that they weren't getting better. And because of that, like, like informed consent and along with other things like came from it, is that like even though people at the head of whatever's auditing the government right now, or whatever is like wants to implement food safety things and quote unquote vaccine safety things, is that even though they may not be the best people to be running these things, is that by setting a precedent, usually what
Mm,
happens is like it starts with extremes, and then it becomes regulated, but at least an awareness was shown. So although I believe like it could be volatile going forward, I think that like having these bodies existing may shine a light on maybe we should do these things in a more balanced way. And I'm hoping
sure.
that the end result is just like an awareness, because like my belief is that the nature, especially post pandemic, is that rhetoric doesn't motivate self advocation for
Mm,
medical freedom and for nutritional responsibility and availability. And so that maybe, you know, although these things may be short sighted in a lot of ways in their implementation, that at some point they could be effective and reasonable, you know.
mm. Indigo twin, Indigo insights, same person. Ah, you are connecting with your spirit. It's a powerful thing. And then she goes, I'm also pagan into
Mm,
energy, astrology, the power of meditation, and natural healing. Ever since I followed my path, I feel so fulfilled, and I've been brought into the orbit of this community. Let's see, the Norse survived, so the Norse survived indigo. It's such a rich connection, you can't exactly destroy it. Yes, the Norse, and there's a culture there too. Eating healthy is expensive. I I do the same thing. I shop at Sprouts, natural grocers, places like that. I'm a big label reader. I found that Amish meats are the best if you eat meat. Yes, and I'm always searching for new connections, new, I don't know what the term is, new connections to whole foods and organic. Um, because yeah, I that was a major waking point for me, was that my doctor said, okay, yep, and I kept discounting her opinions, thinking, well, you're just going to tell me that because that's the alternative line de jour. You have to
mm,
avoid carbs, you have to avoid pasta. But it was fascinating. After I decided to try it, I would cheat, and I would eat. I would go whole hog on a cheat day and eat carbs, and they'd wake up the next day, you feel hungover. Like,
yep.
wow, this that's a good indicator. It's like, you know, yeah, and she could kick my butt. My daughter is a Native American as well. I think she's Apache, but yeah,
Mm,
she could probably kick my butt.
yeah. Yeah, and there's like a lot of really interesting you know, herbal medicine
Mm,
that is commonly used in our culture that is
mm,
like extremely helpful. You know, it's like
yeah.
cedar tea
Oh, yeah.
and mullein and you know, and stuff like that. And
Mm,
it's just interesting that it's like, you know, in the sake of medical science advancement, that like we leave out more simple things that are effective. You know, it's like there should be like I just feel like there should be more of a, this holistic is effective, and then there's like a threshold for medical intervention.
mhm,
And I hope that that becomes more prevalent at some
mm.
point in our lifespan, you know.
I am from the Norse. My family in Finland has been great resource about spiritual connection, culture, and history. It's been amazing. Again, with the Norse, and I find it fascinating how, and I guess suppose it's just because the dominant religion thing. People always, oh, swear to God, but um, or God is my witness. That's a big one in our culture. That Mark Bowden, with the behavior panel, he points out whenever somebody says that, he'll go through. He'll say Odin, as Odin noticed, and it's like it's amazing that it makes it much more apparent what this person is saying when you replace
Mm,
God with Odin and things like that. And it's like
yeah.
that's I'm still relatively conscious the pressure are high. Yes, to make natural affordable. Yeah, since they make it bigger for the market, they get one product, others. Yes, that is very true. And I've noticed the same thing about England. And, but yeah, the way you were going back, in fact, what the foods you were talking about were German. So,
Yeah, if I could stand on the rooftop and scream to the world that Aldi is where everyone should be shopping, I would.
yeah, I love my mushroom coffee too. It's so good for you.
Mm.
I'll take your word for it. But hey, you know what? I've tried a lot of things, so I'll have to give that a whirl. Plus, once you get used to natural, healthy eating, yes, it is when you do cheat, it doesn't taste as good. Very chemical tasting. Oh my gosh, yeah. If I accidentally drink Dr. Pepper, whoa! It's like, oh my gosh! Like
Yeah.
you become sensitive to it. Definitely working medical team to change my diet. It's a journey, yes, and it is. That's the thing is a lot of people say, "Oh, it's just a fad." And like, no, you're talking, I actually live this way. It's a lifestyle change. And it's very intimidating to look at the onset. Like, oh my gosh, I can't do it. But small incremental steps. Yeah, it is a journey. When my dad's liver suffered from the meds, he was ordered a low protein, low fat, no alcohol diet. So I started making sourdough because the yeast is alcohol. Sourdough is interesting. To me, I still use it as a cheat because, again, the no, what do you call it? Low gluten, and also just to make Tara happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And sourdough treats are the best.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The actual coffee. Yes, it's actual coffee with mushrooms added. I think it tastes great. Huh, interesting.
mm.
I've heard her talk about the mushroom coffee before.
Yeah, I'd be
Um,
interested. I'd be willing to try it.
my mom didn't My mom didn't eat eggs for years until she tasted eggs are on a local farmer. They aren't even particularly expensive because she sells them directly, and it's a real difference in flavor. Yes, um, and that's the same thing you can take advantage of with farmers markets and things like that. If you have that in your community, you don't necessarily, some of the stuff you can get yourself, depending upon how well you know the farmer and stuff. Big supportive
Mm.
practices that use medicinal herbs. Yes, and that is Um, and we see that across the board, not just with necessarily herbal medicine, but even with commercial drugs. This push for newer, fancier drugs. When like what was the big one that I was thinking of? Oh, it's an anti. Oh gosh, what is it? Anti-parasitic. They kept calling it horse dewormer
Oh
with Joe
yeah,
Rogan.
ivermectin.
Yeah, ivermectin. Yeah, that thing has been proven. You can produce it really low cost, and the medical establishment was treating it like woo woo. And
Yeah, it's
yeah,
crazy. Yeah, no, it's insane. And that's the thing, right? Is that I just started being more skeptical, and
mm,
but being able to like do that with all while also being objective is like difficult, but like by having a good medical provider that collaborates with you and
mm,
doesn't treat you but help
mm,
collaborates with you to treat
yeah,
you, and respects the research that you do,
mm,
and like
mm,
and yeah, just respects you as a patient and your advocacy for yourself.
yeah,
It has been probably one of the biggest contributors to like my current state of health and my recovery as a whole.
mm,
I'll be honest.
sure, yeah. It's a different mindset. It is, and ultimately because you have to get on board. You have to get the patient on board. I think that's part of the difference between lifestyle, dietary changes versus, you know, popping, a pill.
Yep.
You need to get buy-in. You need to have some skin in the game. That involves working with the patient instead of, oh, I'm going to give you a drug. You're going to take it. Don't ask any questions.
Yeah, I think that risk benefit discussions need to happen way more frequently than they do. Is that things you're right. One thing that is true for one person is not true for another. How come we
Mhm.
can learn this about mental health and supporting people, but it's not
Mhm.
for the sake of efficiency?
Mhm.
It's not always widespread throughout medicine.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, we've been at this for two. I could do this all day with you, for pity's sakes. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
I still think about that creation story and the way you told it in Tara's group. I can't remember the name of the person who replied, but she talked about looking it up afterwards and reading about it, and that yeah, she she read about it, but that she still found your oral version much
Mm.
superior to the official book read version of the creation story. But wait, what, can you think of a question that I should have asked that I didn't?
No, but I do think I do owe just like one piece of something that I touched on that like I think is an important message about like the diagnosis that I had when I was younger about like being oppositionally defiant and
Mm,
bipolar and all these things is that, and I say the same thing to um one of my children who's like experiencing something kind of similar to this, who has a different mother, is that I think it's very hard to diagnose children and teenagers, and especially when they've incurred a significant amount of trauma.
mm,
Um,
mhm,
and that a lot of times people with oppositional defiant disorder end up developing conduct disorder, which is a very
mhm,
significant thing to have. And at this point in my life, I have like anxiety and like mostly resolved PTSD, like even like substance misuse disorder. Like it's considered like treated when you look at my medical chart,
mm,
and that those things didn't define me,
mm, mm,
and that sometimes, you know, situations present some behavioral responses and behaviors and things that may present one way, but as long as I'm like taking care of myself, being honest with myself, and like collaborating and being um, just proactive and active about taking care of my shortcomings, that like the true nature of who I am can come to the surface, and then what other people told me I was may not be true in the end.
mm. Wow, that's quite a paradigm shift there. And I do like that how you talked about that, not defining these things do not define me. Yeah, that is very powerful. Wow. You- Man, you're one of those dream guests. You
I
interview
appreciate it.
yourself. You interview yourself. All I have to do is get out of the way and facilitate. But wow.
Yeah, I
Uh,
can talk, that's for sure. So
Well, it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Yeah, there we go. Uh, for joining us today. I look forward to hearing about your ongoing journey through as you work through the education system, higher education. So, yes, I look. Um, so yeah, I plan on hopefully hearing more from you on this your journey.
yeah, for sure. And I'll say that like I have a ton of gratitude for everyone being here, and I just have a ton of gratitude for you. You've been just like a unwavering source of support for me, and I just like super grateful for you. And I would definitely love to um, collaborate on things that we share interest in, and maybe having some
Sure.
further discussions, maybe just about things not about me, you know? So,
Well, and I am always impressed with the uh it was fascinating in Tara's group because I'm dealing with these issues to hear you start talking about hemochromatosis and all the other, low T and all these other things. And it's like, holy crap, he's actually dug into this. I'm kind
mm,
of afraid to just because, oh my gosh, what a rabbit hole. Oh my.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I love it though. Yeah.
Thank you again. Hold on and I'll get with you. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Please hit the like and subscribe if you like what we're trying to do here. I do hope everybody today has a blessed day. And we'll be doing. There's a community here on YouTube, the Village. There's a bunch of channels getting together. We're attempting to provide a 48-hour stream, not on one
Mm,
channel, but a bunch of channels linked together. I'm planning to be part of that. I'll be doing the morning of Christmas Eve and of Christmas. So if anybody needs connection, if you don't have family or whatever, and hey, if you want connection, feel free to look. There'll be somebody on YouTube. I do hope you all have yourself a very blessed day, and just remember to be kind to yourselves. And yeah, hopefully, um, tell us about your journey. Take care.
bye.